Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inclusively. We have a special meeting today to talk about AI and ML, and our guest is Greg Mayo, Chief Architect at NETSCOUT, and obviously I will be here with Chris Lewis, my partner in crime here, who is the founding director at Lewis Insight. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This meeting is open in the sense that you can interact. You can send your questions, your comments. You can talk to each other. You can talk to us. All of that. Everything is public. So whatever you say, your name is going to appear on it, and everybody else in the audience and us will be able to see it. So please be mindful of that. Be polite and respectful, but at the same time, feel free to share your thoughts. We really look forward, and you are an important part of our conversation. After the meeting is being recorded, and it will be available offline for you to watch it again if you want to. Said that, let's get to it. Well, first of all, at Inclusively, we do many events like this, and also live events. And I would like to thank our partners, which are shown here: the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, UK TIN, TIP, and Telecom TV. And so said that, let me get off this so you can see us better. So today we're going to talk about AI and ML. This is something that Chris and I and our previous guests talked a lot about tangentially. So every time we get and talk about it. So this time we're going to get to the bottom of it and see what is that AI and ML can do in terms of inclusivity. It's a big topic, but Greg is the perfect person to address it and to go in with all of that. Just a quick disclaimer at the beginning, we're going to be talking about disability, mental and physical disability. We are not physicians or doctors, so we are not making any judgment on who is, who isn't, what is impairment, and we just talk about how technology can help in it. So take it as it is. With that said, maybe we will start first with Chris giving us an update on Inclusively, and then Greg can tell us all about himself. How about that?
Thank you, Monica. And as ever, lovely to have everyone with us. Thanks, Greg, for joining us. The Inclusively initiative that Monica and I kicked off is, as it suggests, is attempting to bring together and raise awareness around the telecom industry, but more broadly than that, I think we'll find from the following discussion, and certainly what we've had so far from the CTO at TELUS, from the head of Chief Digital Officer at BT, from people at Vodafone, people at lots of different organizations. We've seen many elements of where it's talked about the diversity of employment within organizations. We're trying to move the discussion to be about actually raising the use of Inclusively to look at all of the customers and customer interaction. And as Monica said, during many of those interactions that we've already had, both the ones we've been able to talk openly about and the private ones we've been having with organizations, because not everyone's comfortable talking about it in public yet, but we're trying to encourage them. But whenever we get into these discussions, I think two really important things come out. One is that it isn't just black and white in terms of who's excluded, who's included, or is it just about vision impairment, about hearing, or today we're going to talk mainly about cognitive issues. The degrees of impairment across all categories are there are so many of them, thousands and thousands of gradations that we can think about. So in trying to raise awareness, we are opening up an enormous range of topics and potential misunderstandings from people, because people tend to have a very set idea about what being blind is, what being hearing impaired is, what being cognitively disabled is, and I think what we what I hope is going to come out in the next session is looking at one particular part of this through Greg to get his view both on AI, but also on this cognitive and that side of things. And there is no answer to the problem. There is only raising awareness and gradually building awareness into everybody, whatever your role is within your organization, or you reaching out into the broader ecosystem or indeed society, that everybody can help do this. So this is a call to arms for everybody able to help. The understanding of the moving parts, of course, is critical. The understanding of the technology is critical. The understanding of the people is critical. Now, and of course, the understanding of the business case is critical. So there are many steps in this discussion. We're not claiming for a second to be dealing with them all. What we are doing is we work our way around the industry because of our contacts within telecom, especially. But I'd say it's actually broadening out from telecom to many of the other areas. So everyone's welcome. As Monica said, please do pop your questions in there. For those not familiar, I'm blind, so I won't be reading the questions. Monica will be handling questions and feeding them to Greg, and then we'll all comment as we go through. But you're here really to listen to Greg, and I think, Greg, would you like to introduce yourself and perhaps even give a bit of background as to how you ended up on Inclusively with us, because I think it's worth telling that story, and then you can get on and give us your perspective on AI and ML.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Chris and Monica, for having me today. I went to school in the 80s, went to college for computer science, and that's kind of where I started studying artificial intelligence and really had a liking for cognitive science and those things. And then in my career, over the last 30 or so years, most of my focus has been on large networking, whether it's telecommunication networks, financial networks, anything where networking is involved. And in that realm, networking is very much like a human body. It's a complex system with different components that are distributed. There's KPIs you have to understand. And so I used my AI ML background in that area to do, analysis, pattern matching and things, and apply it to, is the network healthy? Is it not? Is it safe? Is it not? And that's where I've been, learning the algorithms and applying them over the years. Certainly as now where I've reached and, my kids are older, I was able to take care of my mom in the final years, and she had, some different disabilities. And now at a point where I'm doing more volunteering, and at a point where also I can use my background in, the technology space to interact with folks like yourselves. I happened to meet Monica at an event that we throw for our users. And she was the head of a panel where they get up and, answer various questions on the panel. And afterwards, I was able to talk to her. And then, we had a lot of simpatico around this topic area. And so, and that's how I kind of arrived here. So I'm very passionate towards the technology. There's obviously a lot of mystification about it, certainly both even within the technology sector, and certainly the farther away you get, the more mystified it is to folks that don't necessarily understand some of the, finer details of it. And so I think trying to raise awareness on this, and especially starting to really put it to use, right? And that's one of the things that I've seen is going, from the 80s, and even in the 80s, AI and ML have been around, right? So people don't realize the technology has been around for such a long time. It's just, some of it's Moore's law, right? The computing now is so fast and distributed that we can start to attain speeds that we need to run, 7 billion parameters inside of a ChatGPT cloud. And that with better designs and algorithms have now got us to the point where the stuff we thought of it, people have thought of this stuff for decades. It was just wasn't applied. And then certainly even in the space of, disabilities, you have, my wife worked with Ray Kurzweil, a great, technology founder in the space of AI, who quickly went towards how can he apply it towards optical character recognition. He worked with Stevie Wonder on how to make it to where you can interact with the keyboard better. So, this space has been around for a while. It's just now the AI umbrella is becoming much more aware, and, it becomes much more of a topic for this kind of setting. So thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being here because, as Chris said, we often have trouble finding people that are willing to really talk about all those topics. But before we get into the disability, can you tell us, what is that we should expect? Because there is oftentimes a lot of misinformation out there. As you said, AI has been around forever, but people are just paying attention in our industry now or in the last couple of years. And sometimes there is a lot of hype. You think that, either AI is going to solve all our problems or it's going to take us to self-destruction, or that AI is ChatGPT. So, and none of that is true. So can you give us a little bit about
Sure.
How should we think about it?
It's a great question. So to your point, people often think of it as just a single thing, right? And for the masses, it tends to be what we see either in movies or TV and papers and whatever streaming podcasts, and it can be sensationalized with the Terminator scenarios where it takes over, whatnot, and it also can be brought into more practical realms. And what I like to look at is that the purpose of AI and ML is to automate stuff for us, right? Is to help so that we don't have to do some of the things, and especially if we can't do some of the things, right? So that in the land of disabilities, automating, mechanizing something that can aid us has always been there, and point solutions within AI has been around. Again, optical character recognition, and what's in AI and ML are lots of different kinds of tools in the tool bag, if you will. And there's machine learning. People hear ML, that literally is machine learning, and it's just algorithms that are learning, and those algorithms can learn by watching stuff over long periods of time, and after just seeing it over and over again, it's like, yes, this is different. Or it can just take an algorithm and say, I'm going to throw a 10,000 things against a wall, and I'm going to tell you these things are different from these things, and these are like, and those are like. Those are just algorithms that can then be tuned into now taking and understanding, okay, I can calculate what's into that picture, what's on the wall. And so the AI ML collective is lots of different things that then people now, what's sensationalized it is the ChatGPT. And it's not coming from the movie sector, it's coming from the reality that that platform of deep learning that we saw kind of IBM was that first one to really hit it, where it won. It beat Kasparov in chess, right? That was a big AI moment, right? In fact, back in the day, it was always like, yeah, AI is going to really do well when it can beat the chess master. It did, right? And then okay, now we have ChatGPT that passes the the MCATs or the LSATs. Now the awareness and but then people associate AI ML with just large language AI generative models, and you can get lost in all of the hype about it. What matters for what we're talking about is what can you do with it to help humanity. And it's not the big ChatGPT things, it's this huge tool bag. Use the little things, these algorithms can help here, these algorithms can help here. And not every algorithm has to be a ChatGPT, hosted 7 billion parameter model. And people get, kind of attracted to the light of that. And in my business, even, I have to use different techniques to understand the network, human body. And I don't try to use ChatGPT type out large language models for everything. So I think if we can start, getting to where people are focusing on delivering end solutions, with now that tool bag is so accessible, where a couple of smart teenagers can literally build an app that is AI infused, if you will, towards a targeted solution, whether it be something for inclusivity or for whatever. And so it puts the hands of the power into everybody because the tools are so accessible, ChatGPT being one of them, but it's the big automated hammer to sometimes just knocking a little nail.
Greg, you mentioned that one of the words you just used there, which I'd like to pick up on, you said AI infused. And no, and it's important because you're quite right. I go back to AI back 40 years ago, pre-Kurzweil, and with the expert systems around computational linguistics. And we always said then you had to pre-edit or post-edit whatever you put in. So are you implying by saying AI infused that AI, it's not controlling everything, that there has to be either a pre-element or a post-element, the human element? Can you touch upon how you see the human element? I guess in the network, you're aiming for, as little human intervention as possible, but I'm just curious as to your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, there's a whole aspect about learning models for AI and how to train them in that aspect. And then there's the aspect again that how to apply that into human learning. And in training, again, everything isn't a large language model. Large language models are great at basically sifting through tons of documents and pictures and basically predicting anything that could be asked of it about that, including the LSATs, the MCATs, any test, anything. Now, that doesn't mean it, can help somebody, physically see something. Now, somebody can take an AI algorithm, apply it to a smart app on a phone that takes a picture, puts it in your ear, and tells you what's there. Yep. That is AI infused. You don't need ChatGPT for all that. You need small tidbits of AI. So I guess where I talk about AI infused, it's like, again, AI is a collective of lots of different algorithms, from visual algorithms, from large pattern algorithms, deep neural network algorithms, supervised, unsupervised. And sometimes the little ones can be used, put together, and boom, you got a nice app. And in the end, to me, what matters is the app. Who cares what you like? Do you care what was used if the app is helping you to see something? You don't care if it uses ChatGPT or whether it uses a for loop, right?
Well, in fact, I think I mentioned to you, I use an application called Be My Eyes, EYES, which is now brought out of Be My Eye AI version. And I'm trying to find out from the guy that's produced it how he does it, what it's based upon. He won't tell me. So the mystery, and you're quite right. I love the fact that it describes a picture to me as a blind person of people around me or surrounding around me. It's phenomenally useful. But I want to, because I'm an analyst, I want to understand the nuts and bolts of how it works. But do in terms of that distinction between machine learning and AI, is there a barrier, or is this a gray area? How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, so machine learning generally uses algorithms you feed data into the algorithms, right? And unsupervised is very good for time series stuff. Like take a signal and feed it in, and when that signal goes like this, it can tell you. It doesn't have to know anything, it learns, right? And you can take that and feed in 5 signals and learns when they all change together. It knows nothing other than it learns over time. Is it different using mathematical algorithms? Now, if I've got a kid and you want to teach a kid to do something, that's not generally how it works. Let's say you want to teach a kid to fish. You don't just go to the side of the bank, put down the fishing pole, and walk away. Or not, actually worse, put down the reel, put a can of worms, and put the fishing pole and say, you know what? You should be able to figure this out. You basically show them a few times. Yeah. Like, hey, here's how you do it. You know what? If you do it like this, you get a hook in your eye. So you don't do that. And you teach them. So then you get into teaching, not through like more algorithmic models, but literally through associative learning. And that's where some of the expert system technology of old kind of get thought of as kind of old, but you still have to have the notion of inferencing and knowledge bases, because the knowledge base is what says, oh, there's a worm. The worm goes on the hook does not get in my eye. That stuff you can teach way faster than trying to use a huge thing. You just tell the people, don't, put the hook here. So where I get back to that again is people in our industry even get hung up on the fanciness of the tool and forget about what are we really trying to do. Let's just build a small app. Why aren't we building an app to help somebody hear this, help somebody see this? And even in my competitors will start marketing how good their stuff is doing using something, but it's like, but what is it doing? All I care about, and it goes back to somewhat of like the Turing test kind of approach, which is like, if I'm giving you a result and you don't know how it was done, but it gives you what you want, Who cares what is behind the curtain? If it's assuming costs, social responsibility, all that good stuff. Do you care if it was an AI chatbot or if it was just a person, a monkey? If it ticks socially all the right stuff. But people get focused on, no, I want to use ChatGPT to do that. But you don't. The monkey's going to get it right half the time. I don't need ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Now, hold on. We have a question about controller regulations on AI. We'll get to that later. But Greg, what could you tell us a little bit about, the sort of mental issues? How can they be addressed potentially by AI or ML? I mean, I heard a lot about people talking about how you can have like therapy. So it's like just that, Eliza at the beginning, which was like kind of a joke, but kind of like pushing it forward to something where it can be useful. And I guess that the question, I mean, the debate there is that, yeah, you can get something like ChatGPTs to do it, but it clearly is not going to be as good as a human doing therapy. However, it might still be better and cheaper as nothing at all. And so is it useful or is it not? Or how should we think about it? And or are there other ways that, you have AI can help people with mental and cognitive disabilities?
So that's a great question. And I have the benefit that my daughter is a licensed independent social worker. So she does a lot of social therapy, certainly with young children. And, and trying to look at your question, right? Certainly a ChatGPT can sit there and go, well, tell me about your mother and how was your day? And it can do pretty much the standard, kind of question and answer stuff that you would expect, some standard 101 to go through. Is that going to be beneficial to somebody? Maybe. I don't think so. That's not what my daughter would tell me would be beneficial. But, perhaps, and ChatGPT can do that today, right? You can get on, I'm sure you can find an easy, therapy app for that. What I see, I think, is back to where, how can we use the different tools to actually impact? And like one of the things my daughter does is lots of different techniques in her therapy. So sometimes it's art technique, sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's visual, sometimes it's different stuff. And I think that there's a field where AI can be used to accelerate how to get information into the person the way they consume it faster, if you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
And so there's not a lot of research in that area, obviously, and certainly generally, right, you talk about, the area of cognitive, certainly the areas of the mechanical aspects of the body are the quicker ones we can attack with, we can build things that can help right away. With the mental aspects, it's not as obvious as like, well, what can we build with AI? Like, I can't build just a quick app that takes, that can take a picture and do something. What is it you're really trying to help within this aspects? Is it just a chatbot therapy person so that, Greg Mayo can go get his therapy on Thursdays? Or is it, can we use the techniques to maybe, I would say crowdsource. I say crowdsource because I see today's youth building content delivery different than the elders of the older businesses. And can we get apps, content, right? I don't care if it's an app, it's anything, it's a phone, whatever. Can content get delivered to people that impact? In that area, it's, I think, again, it's, I haven't seen a lot of out there. I'm sure it's.
Well, I guess part of that is about the medical practitioners, and getting into their heads and getting into their training. One of the things that we've noticed in some of the early inclusivity work is that, yes, we can re-educate people of, dare I say, our age, but actually the people coming through, to your point about the developer community, actually getting into universities and schools and making people aware that these requirements exist. And if obviously I follow now a lot of sort of inclusive design people on various social media, and I saw something the other day which would never have occurred to me until I started looking at this, which is that you can animate your signature on an email. You can do all sorts of fancy things with it, but actually that is incredibly distracting to people with certain cognitive conditions. So this comes back to the question, I think, of identity. And if you if you identify as having a certain issue, then does the system respond to you by blocking out a lot of light or by rendering it, to your point about which communication channel gets used? You know, there has to, this touches upon so many elements from, and I think we saw some of the announcements this week from people like Qualcomm about putting more of this processing power down into the device. You know, I guess the assumption we're working with is that it will all be done in the cloud, I think, as you just said. But actually, this gets distributed throughout the whole of the ecosystem, all the way out to the individual, because it's got to be there to help everybody, every point. And I think you're right that we need that crowdsourced developer community to be delivering this sort of stuff. The big guys will deal with it. So I should hold my hands up and say people like Microsoft do an enormous amount of work around accessibility and inclusion. So do Google, Facebook, perhaps to a lesser extent, but I don't really get exposed to that. But I think we've got to also be very aware that at every touch point that individuals have with the systems of the future, with the whatever we want to call it, you know, we've got to be aware that we'll need to render things differently and perhaps screen things out, perhaps give a simpler interface. You know, we spent the last 10, 20 years basically cluttering up our screens, haven't we, with more and more icons and more fancy stuff. And actually, perhaps that's not the answer. Perhaps we will finally go back towards rendering it in a way that suits Monica or suits me or suits Greg or suits your daughter when she's working in therapy and so on. So it's a big question. I don't underestimate the severity of the question.
I mean, certainly, you know, I mean, I love watching sci-fi movies, and, you know, I like to look at them and go, yeah, that's probably going to happen, not going to happen, already happened, you know. And, you know, the notion of a device like from Star Trek that can translate, that can in real time basically connect you to anything by, you know, I mean, that's practically there today, right? You know, essentially, you know, I can almost have my phone do translation, take a picture, you know, in real time, access virtually anything I ask via ChatGPT. That's close. It's getting there. Now, how much does that help us? Sure. I mean, day-to-day life, right? I mean, you know, I think when we talk about inclusivity, I also look at not just, you know, abilities, is even like gender. Like, you know, my parents, you know, as you know, before they died, the technologies were just not as you know, my father was very much in computing in the old days, but now the newer stuff where they weren't just using it as much, right? Even cell phones were hard to use. And so that means that they're being blocked out from using a technology. So certainly I would think AI, by breaking barriers, should also help the age gap for folks that technology is very difficult to access, right? That's why they're still just getting the simple things that can press a button, right, to send a distress signal and whatnot. So it's, I think, helping the, you know, helping the elderly benefit from AI is also a whole nother area.
And I think that's one of the things that we have touched upon in the other inclusively discussions, is that, of course, we focus down, in my case, on the vision impairment community, on what your daughter's doing on the cognitive issues, but actually with the elderly population, you know, a lot of people tongue in cheek say to me, it's the disabled and the not yet disabled, you know, because a big proportion of that elderly population will begin to lose their hearing, will begin to lose their sight, and we know the degrees of cognitive issues and dementia and so on. So it is about making sure that we use this technology properly to keep them as included as possible for as long as possible. And so it's almost flipping it on its head, isn't it? From where people,
I'm even thinking a little bit bigger, which is not so much the like loss of cognition as there's a generation, and even it's not necessarily age-based throughout the planet, that doesn't know how to use technology, even though it's simple for me and you. Are just like, what do you mean? Yeah. Just press here, and they're like, well, I don't even know what you mean. Like, yeah. That may sound simple to us, but I'm sure, you know, a lot of people in countries don't just have access, and we forget some of the simple things. Certainly elderly is the first, and it's not necessarily their cognitive thing. It's just they were born pre-internet, you know. Even I'm 56, but I mean, I work in technology. I have friends who aren't that tech savvy. and it's a barrier for them. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And they don't have any normal disabilities. They're just not capable.
Monica, have we got? Did I hear a question come in?
Yeah, we have more questions. Actually, there is somebody talking about AI for how can AI help elderly may help for loss of hearing, loss of vision, and I guess that this is something that we've been going through all the time. You just sooner or later we're all going to be disabled, or we have been disabled in the past for some time. So disability is not something that is just a few people out there. It's not a minority. It's most of us at some point, which is not like a sort of an appropriation kind of thing, but it's like the fact that at some point we all need something and we need to be able to access it. But let me ask sort of a devil's advocate question here from the other end. It's also true that disabled people might be more vulnerable. So when you have AI that is able to kind of guess and be more intrusive, could it be also a situation where disabled people, especially mentally and cognitive disabled people, can be more exposed to vulnerabilities, scams, and things like that?
For sure. I mean, I would say that, this technology brings the capabilities for a lot more of that. And again, I think, and one of the questions even asks about, regulations and things like that. I think we have to look at it in terms of, the broader scope, right? We could talk about probably session after session after session, right? And, the governments are coming out even with their statements. And I guess I like to focus, as a realist in my job, about what little things can be done to prevent either misinformation or prevent malicious aspects of it or whatnot. And I think that is what I was going to say.
It is, well, perhaps the other element and it goes back to your fishing example, which and it's that thing about if we build around our understanding of the way things work, but we don't allow for people who have an impairment. So, perhaps a stupid example, but can somebody with no arms go fishing? It's because we have to make sure we don't build in the bias that exists in, let's say, society today into the machine learning and into the algorithms. So I guess part of the question is, how do we avoid falling into the trap of just automating? I think what you said was the goal of automating the status quo, because we know that many people are excluded for all sorts of reasons. You mentioned that having the skills to be able to do it, the thought process, the adaptation to do it. So does that? Do you think that? I don't know how that. Because there is a danger there, isn't there? Not only about the malicious side of it, but about that we build a system without, and we're talking about inclusively, about building in inclusion from scratch, that we make sure we cover all possibilities, all the edge, all the peripheral cases when we're designing all systems, which is it's a tall order, right? But if we don't do it, then
this is where it's different in 2023 than it was even 5-6 years ago, is that to deliver a mass, scale change to the planet for an area like this required big governments, huge businesses, massive things like that. Because we would need to have huge discussions on this. With the tool set that's available for any person that knows Python or any simple language to build fairly complex integrated AI systems is super easy, which means that there's a new avenue to get things to people that aren't going to go through the traditional ways of how do we make sure all the big businesses do it right by everybody. It's going to be, I think you're going to find it's going to be more of the organic solutions popping up, solving real problems, and those are going to stick. Because it's almost like, again, like the record industry, right? I'm a musician, and it's like, you don't have to wait for the record producer to be like, yeah, I like that music. Boom, it's out there, right? Somebody comes up with a good idea for solving a disability problem or anything. It's immediate now.
So
Of course, it's unfettered and it's not regulated and this and that, and that's another discussion. But it's a different world of worrying about, is the AI collective going to handle all these corner cases? It doesn't matter, because the collective now is everybody that can write an AI program.
Do you know
Now,
what's... Go on, Monica. Go on.
Could we go back then, since you mentioned regulation, go back to the question and talk about it. So we've seen there is a lot of efforts from the government sides, I mean, worldwide. So different governments coming together, trying to make sure that AI is sort of well behaved. Clearly, that's a big concern, as you pointed out. On the other hand, the kind of genie is out of the box here. It's kind of like open source. It's like everybody has access to it. And clearly that includes risk, but it's also a huge opportunity, because at the beginning you said, there's going to be just a couple of teenagers that might be able to develop an app. So it seems like we're past the point where regulation can stop anything. And maybe that's a good thing, in the sense that that's going to encourage the ecosystem, encourage, whatever. We have to be aware of the risks, but also we wouldn't want to have an AI that is so tightly regulated that those couple of teenagers can do anything.
No, I mean, and that's a great point, right? I mean, it's past the point where you can stop AI from being applied to something, because now it's out there, you can write the algorithms. But sure, you can build a gun, but you still have to stop the person, right? I mean, so it's AI is what's going to destroy us. It would be ourselves, right? So the regulation has to come on the use of it, not we're going to stop development of large language models. Like, it's not large language models that are the problem.
Greg, what when you just talked there, and you, Monica, made me think is that traditionally the development of, let's say, assistive technology or assistance, human assistance, was always done within each, let's say, disability group, or even within each subgroup of each disability. The danger that actually I think this falls into is that if we develop, or if your two teenage people, Greg, develop a solution for somebody with Alzheimer's, can we then easily plug that together with dealing with someone who's losing their sight at the same time, or their hearing's going? Because my experience, certainly to date, is that this has really been done in isolation within each group. But I think, and that obviously worries me, that we're not going to have a coherent set of building blocks that we can bring together to address multiple situations. But actually, the excitement that it creates, where the third sector, the charity sector, or the US, the National Foundation for the Blind, or the RNIB over here, they would have developed things in the past. Actually, the expense was too great. What the whole compute environment does, because we've got the compute power, the storage, the cloud, the devices. Actually, the possibilities of developing things by the people who understand the different, impairments and disabilities, I think is enormous. That's
absolutely,
yeah. I like that. I think that's a very, very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'll say one more time, we don't have to wait for the Microsoft or Google to come out with it. Literally, we can go program it. It's so easy to program AI systems now.
Well, it's almost, I think, the phrase democratizing AI popped into my head while you were talking. So it's like saying anyone can do it, as long as the power of the big guys doesn't block it. And I don't really have a view on that. I think it's too early to have a view on that at the moment.
Well, they can't, because it's been released. Llama model released to the world. It's you can argue, okay, Llama is not as good as Bard, or is not as good as OpenAI, so it's slightly not as good. It's plenty good enough to write very good AI models and train them.
But I have to say here that it's very easy to say bad things about the big guys, but in this particular case, it's not like they're stopping. They're not trying to prevent. So I guess the question is that we need to make sure we deal with bias in the right way, but bias can be introduced by anybody, big and small, good and bad, because a lot of times bias is introduced without intention and intentionally. So there is a lot that is, so actually I think that there is a situation here where everybody's working in the right direction. The question is that, do they put enough effort or not? And so maybe, Greg, you can say, who do you think that when we talk about disabilities and AI, who do you think that is going to lead the charge here? Who's going to be the most valuable, if you think there is one, or if it's just going to be completely distributed, or is it like the teenagers, or is it the Microsoft and Googles?
Well, so it's hard to say. I mean, and I don't mean anything to put down the Microsofts or the Googles. They're trying to solve the big problem, which means a generative AI model for everything, right? Which is awesome. It just means that while they're going along that, there's going to be smaller things that are not necessarily going to get solved along the way. And that's where I think a more distributed, some organic models will pop up, not models, but you know what I mean, solutions, if you will.
Methods, yeah.
That solve something in particular. And it's not just a particular where it's eyesight versus hearing, but it is a collective, human accessibility interface, right? Assistant, something like that, right? That can tie together multiple systems at once. So I think what distributed gives you is it helps to crowdsource innovation. It's not that they're writing better. I mean, the code bases of the big guys are going to be far better than the code bases of the distributed people. It just allows people to innovate faster and get things delivered sometimes to the end customers, especially while the big guys are trying to solve literally the full-on generative AI solution. So I think it'll be a hybrid, right? I mean, even they're partnering, right? The AIs, the Googles, they're partnering with the healthcares, the telecommunications. So, I mean, they're all working on this together at the same time as well. It's just, you know how the list of problems gets prioritized, right? Disabilities sometimes don't make it to the top, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think your point. I know we're not talking about telecom today, but as you say, there will be some more specialist telecom models, algorithms that get developed because telecoms has some unique stuff. We know that you can't just have it. The data can't go out and be generally shared because it's, especially when it's customer information. We know it has to be under a more controlled environment, perhaps under a sovereign environment, given different geographies and so on. So yeah, it's a layering, isn't it? It's a layering of all these AI things.
Yes, and we're going to have something about sensing, which I guess addresses this kind of issues in terms of privacy and what are the trade-offs that you're going to have there. But stay tuned. We'll have one event on this. Greg, there is a question that has come out in a couple of our meetings from Chris, which is, will I be able to see in the metaverse? Now, the question that I would like to ask you is that will AI enable Chris to see, or a deaf person to hear in some way? And the reason why I find this question fascinating, because gets to the question of what does it mean to see in the first place. I used to be a vision scientist, so I'm a little bit biased on this kind of thing, because what should we expect? Because clearly the AI and vision have been major, supporting each other. I was last year at Mobile Congress talking to Interdigital, but others are doing the same thing, and they're working on extracting semantic information from a visual scene. So basically, you translate the visual scene into something that is not visual, which I think that's what Chris was talking earlier about.
Yeah.
And that's something that has been traditionally very hard to do. And that's where you do need, and I think that we might be on a point of actually being able to do this better. Do you want to comment on how could we expect AI to help us with things like that, to basically translate content, analyze content, like say visual content into non-visual stuff?
I would say for sure. I mean, if you look at like that example again, that is a description of everything in the visual realm of what is there, right? AI is great at that. And I'll get back to kind of like the Moore's law stuff now, is like I mean, the big game changer will be when quantum computing comes, but like even with Moore's law, it's pretty fast, right? So we are at the point where an app can pretty much say, you know, you put it on your head and it says, yeah, Greg, turn to the left. You're looking at a lamp. I see a green lamp. I see this. I see that. So that for sure is, and the speeds are there now. You know, just like with anything, it's going to be, are you going to be able to go down to, you know, your local store and get it for $5.99? Someday, you know, when will that happen? When they figure out the business models to make it happen, right? So, you know, it gets back to business, right? Inevitably, the healthcare field of any sort, you know, once you take the business out of it, it tends to be lower in priorities for technology, right? That's the reality that I've seen.
Greg, what about the cost? You mentioned the cost and the business case for doing it. I mean, you know, the money that's been put into it, the compute power that's put into it, and obviously we're interested in the network traffic that will be generated from it. I mean, can you see that? And people talk about whatever you pay per month for an AI service now might well come down to a couple of bucks or something in the future. Can we afford to do all this? I know technically we can do it all, but can we afford to do it?
And when you say afford, are we as humanity?
All of us. Yeah. So I guess that, you know, in the me being able to see in the future metaverse, or, you know, let's say an elderly person at home having all of these services that can recognize what they need to do to remind them to take medication. You know, there is a cost of building all these systems and rendering all this information in a way. I love the idea of it all, but I think
here's the problem with computing now. The costs, I mean, it's easy to write the programs and the people need them. What you're going to see is a hourglass or bottleneck where people want to control and make money off of that. Right? Now, the thing that's just like the record industry example, right? You got all these artists that want to write music, all these people that want to listen, and it was controlled by about these many people. Yes.
Yeah.
You see this throughout the planet. There's lots of examples of this throughout our economy. And this can be one of those examples. What will help us with that is the crowdsourcing, where they can't anymore. Like, we can get the stuff out to people. It doesn't cost that much. Sure, it costs, you got to get the connectivity, right? Connectivity to remote areas, to, you know, impoverished nations, impoverished areas. Yes, that's, you know, literally the physics of iron or satellite, right? Once you have anything, you know, decent connection back to the cloud, because all the analytics runs in the cloud, right? All it's doing is streaming back and forth, right? So you don't need super heavy compute out at the edge. You need a signal, right? 10 megabit, 20, 30, 50, certainly better. And then you can get, it isn't that much cost to get it out to people. But what's going to happen is it'll still not get out to them, probably because of the hourglass model.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris, go ahead.
I was going to say, but what I mentioned before, I think the compute power in your hand in a smart device, you know, and that's just getting better and better. And then the potential sensoring computing in your home or around you in your village or town, wherever you live. I think that is why it won't all go back to the center of the cloud, but
it doesn't have to.
No, of
course. But the cloud becomes the whole collective, because it doesn't matter if it can talk back to Seattle or wherever, it's still part of the cloud, right? It's only when you're not talking back that means you're not in the cloud.
Go on, Monica, sorry.
So, Greg, I know you do a lot of volunteering, mentoring. I say kids just because of an age thing, but they're not necessarily kids. But what is that we could do in terms from sort of our end to sort of encourage or to make them aware of all those inclusivity issues? Because, you know, if I were to say, when you're a teenager, when I was a teenager, you know, the disability part would be kind of lost on me more so than it is now when I start seeing my own kind of things. You know what I'm saying? So is there something that we should do as individuals or as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because AI and ML is so mainstream now. like a 5-year-old probably be like, hey, AI, ML, right? So it's not like where you have to have a mind share. In fact, when you talk about volunteering, one of the angles I do is with what's called NFTE, Network for Technology and Entrepreneurs. And these are kids starting off in either elementary up through high school, following a business plan proposal for various ideas. And they all have these new ideas that include, disabilities, include social aspects, but they still have business models behind them. So it's really, quite encouraging to see that that approach. And I think, that youth is already there. The young youth is already exposed to AI, ML as if it's like, anything else they would call a red ball, just anything that's around them now. So I think for the younger, it's going to be more about the safeguards and appreciations and the fact that, it's no more than the safeguards of the internet today, right? You can take a phone and you can put it in a 5-year-old and they can literally access the worst of humanity within seconds. Yes. All AI is going to do is make that faster. We still have the problem of, well, how is it a 5-year-old is able to access the worst of humanity? That's a different problem. AI will just make it easy and make it faster and easier to have that problem, but you got to solve that problem.
Well, you could also resolve it quicker, couldn't you, by the AI monitoring what the child is doing and having that visibility, that observability in the network.
That will come, but
yeah.
And that'll come for parents that didn't know how to do it, right? Because they could have just not, could have done a few more things, but yeah, it can definitely help. But it's one of those things where it's a race, right? You have the hackers and you have, the guardians.
Yeah.
And you want to be nefarious, and then you build in, controls, and it's always, always going like that. So there's always going to be bleeding of nefarious activities of some sorts. AI will be very beneficial in helping that for sure, but then it'll also be used to make it worse too, right?
So can I take you back? We started, and you started talking about AI and mental health and the work your daughter does, for example. Is that a good example of applying it very specifically and getting very quick returns?
I mean, we haven't gotten returns. This is my idea. Is what I see is an opportunity. I haven't done anything. I've seen my daughter using different techniques in her toolbox, whether it's art, sound, and obviously we talk a lot. And there are apps for people with PTSD, with learning disabilities. So what went off in my head there more is, how do you have some content delivery that is AI infused for people that have cognitive impairment, whether it's PTSD or whatever kind of thing.
But that's,
I haven't done anything yet.
But I don't think that's any different to my sort of vision of and let's take telecom as the example rather than healthcare, of the telecom industry. So rather than you keep telling T-Mobile or Vodafone or whoever, don't send me a physical letter, don't send me email, you need to call me or you need to send me sign language. So that translation of content, the adaptation of content, rendered in a way that suits the individual, whether and in what you're describing, it may be PTSD, of course, is very specific. The example I gave about flashing lights on signatures, once again, so there has to be a marriage of the identity of the individual identifying as, requiring this sort of, this is my personalization of how I want information rendered to me, and then the system in the background being able to translate the information or the content in a way and deliver it in a way that suits the individual. So in my head, this is the ultimate personalization of content delivery and information sharing and collaboration, because it sort of cuts across all these things.
Oh, for sure. And that's where potentially a therapist could work with AI infused software to deliver their therapy. It's not like they're just handing them an app, but they would be working with an AI-based system to help deliver the therapy, just like they do when they're painting or when they're, listening to music or whatnot.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
And I guess you just have AI enabling, sort of building like a plumbing or kind of like a set of platform, and as you say, it is a tools that then you decide what to do. So something might be very specific and something might be more general that applies to everybody. Like, Chris was saying, like, you don't want to do something like animated signatures because there are some people, we don't need to know exactly who they are, but some people it's just not. So avoid things that could trigger things. So, pick the right colors because like 10% of the population is colorblind. So don't just do, pick colors in a reasonable way. We have a question from Chris, another Chris, which is, I like the idea of crowdsourcing, but how can it become trusted?
I mean, the only way I think crowdsourced stuff generally becomes trusted, either it makes its way as in the hands of people as a trusted product through just use, where you've used it so many times, like you trust your phone now, whether it's sending the information back to China or not, you trust it at this point, right? So, and that didn't become, it came through continuous use, and yes, the government telling us and Apple telling us or Samsung or whatnot. Generally speaking, great crowdsource ideas elevate into a bigger business model usually, right? And then become, part of the better, democratic system and capitalist system that still is a business, right? I mean, that's the thing is like, there still is going to be a complete business aspect around all of this. And what we want is where a business can win, the consumer can win, and then the technology wins and the content and everybody wins, right? And if that makes the world go round in a nice way. And so I think we can get to that. It's difficult. I think crowdsourcing just helps force the conversation more, right? Sometimes, and it helps pop up ideas, that sometimes the big guys don't come up with right out of the chute. But generally speaking, it's tough to have a piece of software that is just crowdsourced into something that is absolutely solid, right? In my mind.
Yeah, and I guess if you go back to sort of AI and generally being able to share information on the internet where it's so easy to create content, everybody can do it, and not everybody should be trusted, obviously. So I guess that we need from the other end, or the receiving end, or you access any content, whether it's crowdsourcing, AI, or whatever, we need to develop a sort of awareness on how to assess it. In the same way that something, just because it's printed doesn't mean that it's true, doesn't mean that because it's in the internet it's true, and people just need, it's an educational effort, which is not trivial.
Well, I think it's also, let's think about the platforms across which these apps will be consumed and delivered, and the toolkits that Apple have, that the Android community have in the mobile world. There are certain checks and balances in there. With who knows what under Web 3.0 checks and balances will be out there as well. So I of course, it's up to the industry to make sure that when things get brought in and used, that they are valid. I mean, I still would love to know how are we going to tell whether something's been AI produced from whatever system? Should there be a water stamp on the on AI generated material? I know that the education system is obviously very focused on this at the moment. As useful as all these tools are, we do need to know who's generated it and where it's come from, and the authenticity of it. And I think that's part of this project. It's a good question. We do need to make sure the policing, if I dare use that word of this, to go back to the regulation, that the policing of so we're not abusing it. So it is inclusive to go back to the whole purpose of what we're talking about, and that it does bring everybody into the fold. So yes, there's a massive opportunity, but we do need to be very, very aware of the bad actors, as I think, the black cats, as I think you mentioned. Monica,
absolutely. Yeah,
I think you need to wrap us up.
We need to wrap it up. Well, thank you again so much for Greg for being with us, and all of you in the audience. And the conversation is going to be available soon, and also you can go to the link here that I shared with you before to register for new events and also for watch previous ones. Also, I would like to point out that Chris and I will have a panel at the MEF Connects in London on November 28th, and then we will be in Amsterdam on November 22 and 23 at the Total Telecom Congress to talk about this as well. So we hope to see you there. And thank you all for participating.
Greg, thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great day.